transferable skills.
Mike, I knew I can get you today because I'm sure you're doing a lot of work, but it is summer vacation for you, yes?
Yes, it's a summer vacation. Yeah.
The perks of being a teacher, albeit those people that give teachers a hard time about having so much time off and why do you complain so much? I challenge you to work the hours that I know teachers do during those other 9 or 10 months out of the year. I'm a firsthand observer of my wife, who's an educator, and the insane hours that she works, all the preparation that goes into being a good teacher, an excellent educator, a well prepared and engaging one. It's certainly not time off. We call this recharging time.
Yeah, it's funny. You went straight there, and then you defended it all at the same time. So
That's what I'm here. I'm here to break you down and then build you back up.
nice job.
When we first met, I heard about your past career, and we're going to get into that right now.
I was in radio. Sports radio was my aspiration, to be exact, but somebody who had a fear of public speaking, if you would believe that or not. So when I went to college, I actually started to major, and nobody really knows this, into sports psychology. It really was psychology, but there wasn't enough sports and too much biology, and I'm a lousy science student. So I said, you know what, got to ditch that. Got to figure something else out.
In order to do a real analysis, you have to understand the sport itself. But you also, it's interesting from a psychological standpoint, understanding and evaluating the players, their body language, the mechanics, but also their mental state. And maybe that factors into their performance in general.
I just wanted to be something sports. I wanted to be immersed in it. And being on the radio side appealed to me, especially in the early days of the late 80s and early 90s when sports radio was just beginning to boom. I thought I can get my foot into it. And oh yeah. I was all in. I think, the real message or the real idea is if you have a passion, follow it. So then I changed my major and I majored in speech and drama. Early on in my junior year, the Dramatic Society came and sought me out and asked me, a couple of guys who knew me, asked me to try out for a role in their major production. All the while, I had applied for an internship at WFAN in New York, which was literally, I think, 3 years into being a sports radio station. And I got the internship. And so I was balancing those two things at the same time.
What was pushing you forward to both pursue this academically as well as internship and career in roles that are really massively public facing? Theater, radio, you're talking to or performing for a large audience, and yet earlier describing that you even still have maybe insecurities or reservations about public speaking.
You know what it is? As we make the transition later on into what I'm doing now, there's a performance aspect to it that I love. Even though for me personally, I'm a behind the scenes kind of person, but the performance aspect is what I really like. I knew that the more I immersed myself into public speaking, I was going to cure myself of that fear of public speaking.
You get this internship, I assume, in sports broadcasting.
Yeah.
How did that go, considering you had no experience before?
Yeah, and there's no playbook, there's no guideline. The executive producers who ran the interns at the station never told us how to do, what to do, or in order to make the internship as worthwhile as possible and learn as much as possible. It was just come there 2 days a week that you had your internship. It was what it was, and I learned nothing. I took away nothing. I wouldn't say, put it this way. It was invaluable in a sense that sometimes you learn what you don't want, which I think is sometimes more valuable than what is good. What I realized was I needed direction. At the time, I was 19, 20 years old. I didn't ask for direction. In the absence of that, I didn't know enough to. I just thought they were going to. I'm at WFAN in New York, the premier sports radio station on God's given earth. And they gave us no direction at all, nothing.
Is that because they couldn't care enough to give you direction, or they were hoping that you would figure it out on your own and then bring your own unique deliverables?
The latter, because there were some interns, man, they put their arms over them, gave them nicknames. I went in there like a ghost. I walked in like a ghost, walked out like a ghost, fairly nondescript, which left me after I graduated and I still wanted to pursue that. And I had a little radio show in college, and I was friendly with one of the hosts at WFAN who came on, Jody McDonald, who still is doing national radio for CBS. Tremendous guy. And even after I graduated, the only thing I wanted to do was still radio. And I sent out, just from a guy's basement who had a studio, I recorded some feed, some play-by-play, some talk radio, which I wrote down. I scripted all myself and sent it out to every radio station in the state of Florida, because I'm from Miami. And hopefully something would catch on, and something caught on.
Did you know how to make that reel before your internship?
Not all from my own head.
Great. So now you got 4 takeaways from that job that the perception is that it gave you nothing. The first is you knew now what you didn't want. You knew that you were passionate about this industry, broadcast radio. You got something that is very notable on your early stage resume.
Yeah.
And you were given some of the inspiration and even tools in order to now take it to the next level by developing this reel that you can send out.
What did Rod Stewart sing? Faces. I wish that I knew what I knew then when I was younger. I hope I quoted that right, but that's exactly right. Yeah.
It truly is a paradox. I wish I knew then what I know now, but if I knew then what I know now, it would limit my exposure and opportunity to gain other experiences too.
Right. Right. We wouldn't be, as they say, we wouldn't be where we are today.
Certainly wouldn't be more well-rounded. If we knew then what we know now, we'd be so tunnel visioned and hyper-focused and hyper-specialized, and we could be very successful in that one thing, but that's all we would be known for. I know Baroque art because of all my art and architecture history classes I had to take. I certainly don't use that in almost any conversation today, but I appreciate it more now.
Right. How many of us would, wow, I'm going to bring up an old television show. How many of us would actually benefit from being a Doogie Howser, being that knowledgeable, that young, and only doing that thing? It doesn't make us the well-rounded human beings that we are today. You're 100% right.
It all depends on the goal. If my goal is to be the industry leader in a subject and to earn a lot of money for my nest egg, then sure, go be that Doogie Howser, and you will be well respected and known and successful in that one thing. But there's a big difference between being that individual, which are the rarities, the outliers, and the people that I love sitting down and having a beer with, that have great conversation, because it's not just about that one thing that they know and the subject that they command. It's about the breadth of knowledge and experiences. These are the people that I like sitting around and talking to, because it's not about one thing.
Right. And by the way, as opposed to what I didn't learn at WFAN, I did learn at a station that was, light years smaller than FAN, a little radio station just south of the Quad Cities in Monmouth, Illinois, where their motto is, "We have more banks than people." Well, at least it should have been. I learned how to cut my own copy. I learned how to produce my own show, because there are no producers. I learned how to do a farm report. I actually cultivated my own coach's weekly radio show. Had to propose that myself.
That's the perfect adjective to use for that, the cultivating it.
Yeah. Well, yeah. All those things I had to learn how to do, on my own. At small radio stations, they don't give you guidance either. You have to ask. I learned, from watching, asking, and then figuring it out myself. But the key to the whole thing is, once you learn all of that, it still has to fit your personality. It still has to fit who you are. You got to bring who you are to the table, because if I'm learning from a different DJ, or if I'm learning from a different host and I'm trying to emulate what they do or say, it's not going to work at all. It's going to fall so flat.
Imitation is the highest form of flattery, but it depends on what we're talking about.
Yeah.
If you're going to be a personality, you have to be that. You can't be somebody else who you're not.
Right.
It's also not sustainable, nor is that actually interesting. We want Mike. We want this guy specifically for what he brings to the table. And those two experiences were vastly different. Your first internship gave you some of the buy-in and emotional interest in pursuing this. And it sounds like your next job in Monmouth, Illinois, gave you a little more of those actual hands-on skills within broadcast radio.
It was a passion for sure. I wasn't giving that up. But there's also one part to the recipe where I was going to show them. I was going to show FAN. I was going to show them that I'm going to elevate in this business. and they're going to regret not fostering me the way they should have.
Spite is one of those characteristics that actually has the potential to serve you very well.
It served John McEnroe very well, but that was an ace, by the way.
There's so many people that we know personally or know about second or third hand that were successful in their career out of spite, either because they felt wronged by somebody that didn't give them enough chance, or that they need to prove something to themselves or maybe their parents or their teachers or their colleagues, whoever it was that they felt didn't give them enough credit. They're now going to work 3 times, 4 times as hard in order to prove what they lost or what they didn't bet on.
Don't let anybody ever tell you no. Michael Jordan's high school coach said, no, not good enough. Greatest of all time. There are a million stories in the Naked City about people who said no and then went on to be wildly successful.
Those are the best stories. The ones where it's obvious their trajectory is boring.
What are we going to learn from them also? Nothing.
Right. For sure. We learn more from our failures than our successes. It's why we always root for the underdog. We root for the underdog because we want to see good sports. We want to see a great game. We want to see an upset. We want to see excitement, and anticipating the results is expected. Not anticipating an outcome and being surprised by that. That's where you see the most remarkable, memorable moments in sports and in life in general. I want to talk more about these skills. Now you're in your second job in broadcasting. What kind of skills were you utilizing in your workflow?
First of all, my own communication skills, which I just felt were lacking. I'm talking about interpersonal communication because I was also the assistant news director at the station after about 6 months because people came and went. It's a small radio station. So once people go, you're elevated. You're the next man on the totem pole. I had to fish down news stories. I had to talk to local police. I had to talk to, local emergency technicians, store owners. I had to farmers. I had to really start to get these interpersonal skills that I really didn't consider myself good at. I had to write my own copy. I had to write my own news stories. There were so many different and varied things that almost didn't seem to have any sort of relationship with each other that I was forced to bring to the table.
Listening to a news segment, it might be a 90-second clip while you're driving somewhere, and
people have no idea.
No idea what goes on into that 90-second clip. And you're experiencing this right away because you have to source your own leads. You've got to follow up with them. You got to do the research. You got to do the interview. You've got to write your own copy. That's a lot of individual skills together. One of the things that I've always maintained is that if you are a good, effective communicator, verbally and especially writing, I think that that's an important skill to have in any role.
I'll even go so far as to say it's invaluable. And the biggest takeaway I had at that time that I transferred later on into teaching, and in the first 10 years of my teaching career, I actually taught language arts. Go figure, for somebody who ran a math department for many years. It is the difference between understanding that the written word and the spoken word are two completely different mindsets. Something as very minute as just people taking you seriously and understanding how to organize your thoughts, the proper grammar, spelling and punctuation count. Those are things that even the minutia of that, most people don't really think too much about that. I remember several years later when I was taking my master's courses and we were doing our thesis class. And one of the last aspects of the class months in was that 20-page pre-thesis paper we had to write. We had to turn it into a colleague in class for them to critique it also. And I realized, oh my God, nobody really knows how to write. Even in a thesis, the writing skill, adults, writing skills, not great.
Did that make you feel more confident about your own skills?
Oh my God. I always think no matter what it is. And I don't know how I've spoken to several friends about this. Some of them are doctors. Some of them are pretty prominent and very good at what they do. There's this feeling inside that somebody's going to figure me out. I'm a fraud.
Yeah. Imposter syndrome. I don't belong here.
I don't know what I'm doing. And yet I'm wildly successful at what it is that I'm doing, but somebody's going to figure this out. And what's my story going to be? And yet it never happens. You realize, yeah, I belong. It takes so long to get to that point.
It takes very long. And you realize that you're allowed to try things out. You're allowed to make mistakes and learn from those mistakes to improve.
Right. There is a one of my current favorite groups called the War on Drugs. There's a line in one of their songs that said, "We're all just walking through this darkness on our own." If you're walking in this darkness on your own, you're allowed to make a million mistakes. It's one of the things I've got a lot of isms that I've coined over the years for my students, and and one of the things I tell them is you're allowed to make a million mistakes in this life, just so long as you don't keep repeating them.
That's right.
Make them, learn from them.
It's also funny, the notion of you're allowed to, the permission. Who's making the rules to say otherwise?
Well, we're so concerned with how people see us and perceive us that we really don't operate unto ourselves.
There's a conversion rate for everything. There's an acceptable tolerance. If I try 100 times and fail all 100 times, then I have to evaluate, what am I doing wrong, or what could I be doing differently? Maybe it's not about the actual engineering of what I'm trying to do. You have to be introspective in as much as you have to be reasonable and tolerant that it takes time to learn anything and to do it well.
Without question. And to take that one step further, in working in so many different schools as I have, what I really find is that the best supervisors are the ones who say, "You do you. If you want my help, ask. If you want some guidance, I'll support you in the best way possible. Just understand there's no one path. As long as the desired results are there, who cares how you get it?" Well, I mean, we're talking within the confines of ethics, et cetera, et cetera. But that really is the bottom line. And failure is going to be a part of that.
What do you think that does to somebody who has a manager, boss, mentor that gives them that kind of autonomy?
Scary. I think a lot of people like handholding, to be honest. We moved to Chicago 4 years ago from South Florida, and I was looking for a school, and I interviewed, and I got the job in Chicago. One of the things that I told the head of school was, I'm an educational cowboy. I'm just used to working alone. I don't like hand holding. And the one aspect that I've taken away from this school is they're very big on teamwork. They're very big on collaboration. That doesn't work for everybody. It's a learned skill. There's no template out there.
What was the response when you characterized the way you work as being kind of autonomous, cowboy, independent?
We had a chuckle about it. And it really came with a caveat of that I was the one who self-expressed that it's just something that I'm going to have to learn. Man, I was 50 years old at the time, learning new skills. I mean, that doesn't mean there's no such thing as an age where you limit yourself on skills. But when you've been in the industry, a certain industry, and at the time I had been in education for 25 years, I'm now going into year 30. You're pretty set in your ways. I work for and with other people. I like to think with, not for. In order to make it successful, I've got to make it work, not them. I've got to make it work.
What's your process for being open and receptive to feedback, but also inspiration and growth? Because you can't sustain any career path if you're not growing or interested in learning from others. Where do you find that inspiration, and how do you kind of make yourself vulnerable?
You have to force that on yourself. Look, I remember when I was a young teacher, when I first got into teaching, and those first 5 years at that particular school, every time a young teacher was called into an office for a meeting, it was always negative. So for me to glean something in terms of how do you find the inspiration, where do you find it, it took a very long time, because even to this day, it's almost Pavlovian, where if a supervisor calls me in for a meeting, I automatically go, this is negative. Or I say to myself, what did I do?
We're raised that way in school, right? When you're called to the office, the assumption is you're in trouble.
Right. A former principal of mine asked me, would I be open to mentoring a younger teacher? And I said, no. If a young teacher was going to copy the habits that I have.
You gained knowledge and even strategy over your years of teaching. Don't you think you have a responsibility to help somebody younger and mentor them and give them some of these learnings at the risk of maybe them taking on some of the less quality traits?
Absolutely. Of course. Now, I mean, that was what, 10, 15 years ago. Of course, now I would embrace a younger teacher and really help them, because look, the teaching industry is struggling. We need teachers. This is my PSA. We need great educators. And for anybody to walk in my classroom and me to show them habits that would dissuade them from teaching, I would never do in a million years. We need great educators.
Why are we short on great educators?
We are short on great educators, first and foremost, because the pay is lousy.
Yeah.
The whole idea, we can get into a whole philosophical discussion on how our values in this country are so out of whack that we don't, well, look, I don't fill a movie theater with people. I'm not making money for Paramount or DreamWorks. I'm not. I'm not making money for the Dallas Cowboys. I'm not.
I'll flip that logic or that analogy over on its head. If you have a blockbuster film, what percentage of the US population pays to go see that film?
5%, 10%, maybe.
I'll accept almost any answer you give within that realm.
Yeah.
You can even bump it up to 30%, which is not realistic. What percentage of the US population needs good educators or finds themselves at some point in a classroom?
It's over 100, if there's such a thing.
You're right. We're not going to get into the philosophical debate over appropriate compensation.
Right. That's a different podcast.
That's a completely different podcast. But we can look at it from the standpoint of what this podcast is about skills. And to become a teacher, it's one of those professions where you truly can't do it without a level of credential. You need to be certified to a certain degree to teach most things, and you need education, experience in order to actually get good at those things, and years of service to become great at those things. So you're talking about the demand requirements that typically need to be present for someone to excel in this profession, which is no different than many other professions for that matter. And I would argue our earlier point at the beginning of this conversation about the misnomer of teachers taking the summer off, because we all know that they are also, many of them, lesson planning, preparing, and taking a well-deserved vacation when needed. Because I can also tell you firsthand that our ability to take a vacation is limited to not just seasonality for the weather, but seasonality of the education calendar system. My wife can't take a vacation anytime she wants. So yes, you can be certain that in June, July, and or August, we're spending time together as a family going places. And if you look at the other 9 months out of the year, not only are teachers limited to restrictive blockout dates when they can and can't take a vacation, but I guarantee you that most teachers who are good at their job spend at least more hours a day working on their craft, on their job, than other people do in other typical jobs as well. The notion of a 9 to 5 doesn't exist in education. I know what time my wife gets out of the house. It is well before me. And I know what time she gets home. It's not that much earlier than me. And I also know how many hours a night after dinner, before and after bedtime for children. I know how much work is put into either lesson planning, grading, communication, responding to either admin or teachers or parents. There is a lot of work that goes into it. So why are we not compensating? If you want, forget about philosophy, how you define the value of an education. If you want to just stick to skills, I can break that down objectively of what skills are required and demanded for someone to be in this profession. And if you want to just talk objectively about the average number of hours that somebody puts into this job, it exceeds many other roles that are compensated at a much higher level.
I'm going to throw one more log on that fire because this podcast is about transferable skills. If there's one common bond, I do math, least common denominator is this is a performance art. I was doing that in radio and I brought that into teaching. It is an art form. I'm using the word art specifically because teaching is an art form. I've always said it's one part Barnum and Bailey circus and one part knowledge. You got to bring that knowledge. I mean, you can't not teach without having knowledge. You can't fake math. You can't fake algebra. It's not possible.
You also can't fake classroom management skills. You will fail very quickly.
There has to be an authenticity unto yourself that you bring to the classroom and your students, especially middle schoolers. They will chew you up and spit you out. There is no other age group that will spot a fraud and destroy them, much to the chagrin of a lot of people who have tried this. Middle school's not for everybody. I remember there was an article many years ago in the Miami Herald. It was a 2-part Sunday series on why teaching 7th grade is the hardest grade to teach, K through college. And a lot of it has to do with their transitions in life. And actually, after all my years of teaching, my favorite grade to teach. I love teaching 7th graders. Turning a student on to mathematics and watching that light bulb go on and knowing somewhere along the way there was a conduit of inspiration, whether it was me, the method, whatever it was that turned them on, and all of a sudden they have turned that corner and it's all systems go. I would love to know 10 years from now how that resulted in. Where did that go?
You beat me to it. Not to put too much pressure on the teachers out there that are listening to this, but every moment is a lifetime of inspiration.
Every moment.
It's the reason why we most often in conversations where we're talking about someone's successes in life, in their career, more often than asking which boss most influenced you in the past, the question typically is, did you have a teacher that inspired you, that you remember, that you're most inspired by? You have opportunities to instill not just academic skills and knowledge, but also life lessons, the ability to inspire an individual that draws on that. There's a teacher that I had through middle school, and I wish I knew where she lived today. I wish I had access to just reach out to her and tell her, thank you so much. A lot of my teachers cared about me. I felt even back then as a middle schooler that she took the extra step, that mile beyond what was reasonable and accepted. She cared about the students, especially the ones struggling like myself. And so, Miss Matchett, if you're out there, and I would love to just say thank you. Everybody has at least, whether it's a teacher or a coach, somebody that was part of their upbringing that inspired them, gave them something that lit the fire and can carry you for a lifetime.
Yeah, Mr. Seamus, I'm sure you retired a long time ago. I don't know where you are, but you were my Algebra 2 teacher in high school at North Miami Beach Senior High. And, I tip my cap to you for being the Mr. Rogers of teaching. Always calm, always level-headed, never got too excited.
Who was it that reached out to you while you were working in broadcast radio that suggested you should go into education?
An old junior high school principal of mine, Dr. Jerome Levy, passed away many years ago. Called me up 6 months into my radio career and thought I'd make a good teacher. From where he thought that, I have absolutely no clue, because being in a school was the last thing I ever wanted to do. I was not a very good student. 2 years later, he called me again.
You said no the first time.
Yeah, with no viable prospects. And this time I said yes. It would get me out of Monmouth, Illinois. It'd get me back home. I'd get a salary and I'd look for something else.
Oh, this was your expectation. This was a stepping stone to something completely different.
Yeah, I mean, what that something was, I have no idea, because I was trained in one thing. I didn't know how to make that a transferable skill to any other thing. What I didn't realize was how transferable the skills were from radio into teaching, and how that's what I leaned on without having been. I'm not a classically trained teacher. I had to go back to school for 2 years to get my associate's degree in teaching. Then I had to go back and get a master's. Without being technical about it, pedagogy, matters. Teaching philosophy matters. And there's a certain way to go about it in the classroom, even in terms of classroom management. And I don't think I've ever followed one of those rules, ever. I'm not a rule follower to begin with. It's not in my nature. And yet we have a lot of rules, but they all have to work for you. Yeah, they have to work for you as an individual. Does that mean that you step all over whatever institution's rules that they have? Of course not. You learn to massage a little bit.
The most meaningful rules were created by way of reverse engineering a goal. What do we want the outcome to be? And what rules need to be in place in order to help facilitate that outcome?
It's so funny you say that, because I really firmly believe I took 7 Habits of Highly Successful People many years ago. A school forced us to take it. We got a grant. Oh my God, it was drilled into our heads. Begin with the end in mind. It's as simple as that.
Yeah, Stephen Covey, also Simon Sinek's got the book, Start with Why.
Very good. Yeah.
These are all about the same things. It's
right.
Don't make rules for the sake of having rules. Don't start with a solution. Solution should be born out of the need based on the problem. So why are we doing this? What is the end result and goal that we're hoping to achieve?
If this was simply an educational podcast, my first lesson would be, what is your goal? Think of the end. How does that look? I teach geometry. When I think of teaching proofs, oh man, I just bored everybody to death.
I've already tuned out. My eyes are
or I gave them PTSD from their geometry days. It is know how your proof is going to end before you start it. Now, I was never taught that. That's not how I learned. Again, this goes back to me not being a classically trained teacher. I figured these things out on my own, and they worked. And then I imparted them on my students, and over the years, I perfected it. And the next thing you know, you've got the secret sauce, man, that just It's fireworks, and it works all the time, every time.
I got one last question for you before we end here. New math or old math?
No such thing. No, your own math. Math never changes. Publishers change, but algebra's algebra. Everybody's got a certain idea as to what order it is, as to how, the scope and sequence of it.
Nobody has figured out how to change the physics of math?
Nobody. Everybody thinks they've got the right ideas to scope and sequence, but it's got to work for you as a teacher and what road you want to go on. And then as you're teaching, you got to figure out what your students understand. Is it working well? Do I have to take a step back? What did they miss from the year before? Do I have to do reminders? Do I have to reteach, retest? It goes far and wide and deep. It does. But ultimately, new math versus old math, no such thing. And anybody who tells you, one or the other, sorry, I'm going to step on toes here, but they don't know what they're talking about. And you're going to get some feedback. Hopefully somebody's going to write, Shuman has no idea what he's talking about.
I wouldn't have asked the question if I wasn't looking for feedback.
I hope they say I don't know what I'm talking about.
Mike, it's been a true pleasure to have you here today talking about your transferable skills from broadcast radio into the classroom as an educator. And I just want to say thank you for carving out this time during your precious time off. And I know you're still working, as most teachers are during their time off. And thank you for being here and explaining this to our audience and sharing your stories.
Noah, thank you. My pleasure. And hopefully somebody will gain something from this.
No doubt. I want to thank Suzanne Mishkin for recommending Mike as today's guest, and to you, our listeners, for joining us on this episode of Transferable Skills. Remember, if you found value in today's episode, please subscribe to the podcast, leave a review, and share it with your friends and network. Your support helps us reach more people who could benefit from these stories. Transferable Skills is produced by Cackle Media and music by Cosmonkey. For more resources and inspiration on leveraging your skills for successful career transition, visit our website at www.cacklemedia.com. Follow us on social platforms at Cackle Media for updates, and join our community of listeners who are all about embracing change and growth. If you have any questions, feedback, or want to share your own career pivot story, email us at skills@cacklemedia.com. We'd love to hear from you. Thank you for listening, and remember, the skills you've gained can take you anywhere. Until next time, keep exploring those transferable skills.